Attention, please. We're going to postpone the meeting for about 15 minutes. The computer's doing an update. We don't know how long it's going to take, hopefully in 15 minutes' time. Without the computers, we won't be able to get the presentations, so we'll take... Yeah, Ivor?
Chair, could I suggest that under standing orders we actually start the meeting and adjourn, because my understanding, if the meeting doesn't start within 10 minutes, the meeting is cancelled. I can't remember which standing order it is, but I do remember reading it.
Yeah.
We could do the minutes of the previous meeting. Sederunt.
Okay, thank you, Ivor. Yes, I think that's what we'll do. We'll do the Sederunt and stuff like that, and then we can adjourn for 15 minutes. Thank you. I would also like to say that this meeting will be recorded, and the recording will be available for people to listen to in the future. If you've got mobile phones, could you just please make sure they're switched off or put onto silent? And I'll now ask Nick to do the Sederunt. Thank you.
We have apologies this morning from councillors Dempster, Carruthers, Fairburn and Maitland. Thank you. And David McKee. We have 15 members present for the start of the meeting. Ronnie Tate as well, thank you. 15 members present for the start of the meeting, Chair.
Is there any declarations of interest? Katie? I'll take Dougie next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just in relation to the Sparling Bridge. I just wanted to say that I have seeked governance, having been a ward member where that application is being placed, and I've sought advice that I do not need to declare an interest, but I just wanted to make that clear that I have sought governance on that item, because I have previously declared an interest when it's come to the flood defence scheme.
Anybody else? Dougie?
Thank you, Chair. Two of the items this morning. Item 4, the Fish House, Monks Way, Tongland. I have been approached by objectors to this application, albeit I haven't expressed any view or opinion on the outcome of this application, and therefore I don't see any need to withdraw for this item. And item 5, Newton Farm Campsite, Gatehouse of Fleet. In the body of the report, it refers to planning enforcement having taken place at the site. I was last year approached by the local community council, and in response to that approach, I contacted planning enforcement, and I understand that the reference within the report will be the outcome of that. I haven't taken any further involvement in the matter, and therefore I don't intend to withdraw for that item either.
David?
Thank you. I've called in item 7. I've had numerous discussions with both the planning officers and the applicants for my information, but without forming a view until today.
Is that all declarations? Thank you. Right, we'll just move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Do members agree with the minutes, or is there?
Under number 2 of that declaration's interest, it says that I'll give the declaration of interest that a relative lives in the locality. That wasn't exactly the reason I gave. The reason I gave was they were one of the objectors, and a statement was being read out on their behalf. Not just that they stayed in the locality, even although they do. It was more or less they were an objector.
Okay, thank you, John. No more. Can we approve the minutes then? Can we agree on that? Before we adjourn, I'll get Nick to talk out the outline of the procedures to be followed.
Yeah, if I speak slowly enough, Chair, the computer might have rebooted by then, so we'll see how we get on. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chair has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy. No other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties will be heard as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee. Such members should withdraw from the committee chamber after making their presentation. Applications or their agents. Representatives have been placed in alphabetical order, and a copy of the public speaking list is available from the committee officer taking notes of our proceedings. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, excepting for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The Chair of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you're in danger of taking too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will already have read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee from the public gallery. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application or, where appropriate, agree a recommendation to be made to full Council, who will determine the application.
Thank you, Nick. Amy, have we got the computer working?
No. Oh.
We'll take a 10-minute adjournment. We'll come back at what time? 5:02. Okay, thank you. Back. All right, well, that's fine, that's good. I believe we're good to go, unless there's going to be another update during the process. I hope not. So we'll carry on and move on to item 4 on the agenda. This is the proposal for alterations to and extension of a derelict building to bring into use a dwelling house, brackets, amended design to that previously approved under 11/P/2/0391, partially retrospective at Fish House, Monks Way, Tongland, and here to give a presentation is Mary Mitchell. Mary.
Thank you. I'll start by giving a little background to the application and then we'll look at the slides afterwards. On this site, an application was approved in 2012 for the alteration and extension to a ruinous building to create a dwelling house. This development was commenced around a year later. The works did not progress as per the approved plans. Enforcement action was taken and work ceased on the site. The current application is for an amended house design and also to regularise the works which were undertaken without the proper permissions in place. The principal The principle for a house on this site, along with the vehicle access, the wastewater arrangements, the archaeology and the tree works have not altered since 2012, since the 2012 permission, and they should not be revisited here. The 2012 approval of a house on the site did not require the retention of the former fish house structure in any way. Any retention or rebuilding of this structure has been a design choice on behalf of the applicant. Essentially, this design of a new house should be assessed as a new build. So we'll look at the images. The site is located in the centre of Tongland. It's outlined in red there. You can see to the south of the application site there's an area outlined in blue. That is a piece of land also owned by the applicant, and there's a separate planning permission on that site for a house. On the site there are two archaeological structures of interest, the fish house and the ice house. Not much remains of the fish house, but I understand the ice house is fairly intact. Through the centre of the site is right-of-way, which runs through there. It's to be left fully accessible in the development. This area of the site is shared with this planning approval for the septic tank there. So the proposal involves building up the walls of the former fish house building, which you can see here, and to build an extension to the north of it. This is the fish house building here, and the extension. This is the side that would face onto the right-of-way. This side here, this elevation, would face onto the river. You can see there's a glass balcony there. These are the gable ends. Part of the works which were undertaken without proper permission was the building up of this retaining wall here on the river side of the site. Earth was brought in, which filled that area in to make the site more level. The former ground level you can see dotted along there. These show the existing elevations of the former fish house. There's less of the fish house at the moment. There must have been a collapse of sorts. There's not as much stonework left. These are the elevations which were effused at the back end of last year for a similar application to the one being proposed today. As you can see, there's no rubble stone base course on this extension here or along here, which the current proposal includes, and the current proposal also includes a screen at the end of the glazed raised balcony there. These are the elevations that were approved back in 2012. These are the site photos. So here's the right-of-way which goes through the centre of the site. That's part of the remains of the fish house here. The south gable end of the fish house. Again, the fish house. And this is the location of the extension. You can see this is the door to the ice house here, which is largely underground in this slope. The septic tank would be located up here. This is the retaining wall which was built up along here. This is a neighbouring property called Riverside Cottage, and this is their garden here. Again, the block wall and the right-of-way. So the septic tank would go up here somewhere, and the fish house door is just there. Fish house door. Okay, and the one of the objectives is going to show some slides in a moment. So this application is come to committee because the Community Council has objected to it, and also because we've received more than 5 objections from third parties. The main grounds for objection in both counts are design issues. The recommendation is to approve subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mary. Has any members got any questions for the presentation, Ivor?
Chair, Mary mentioned that enforcement action was taken. What actually action was taken? An
enforcement officer came on site 2 or 3 times, I think, to see exactly what works had been undertaken, and they had a series of correspondence with the applicant asking them to either cease the works and put in a new application, or to put everything back to the way it was, because what they'd done needed planning permission.
Yeah, I'll take Dougie Campbell and then Jim McComb.
Thank you, Chair. Mary, I've got a number of questions here, so bear with me as I go through them. Is the current application that we're looking at today, is that in effect a replication of the successful application from 2012?
It's not a replication, no. It's an amended design. The house design is different in a number of areas. I could show you the elevations again, if that helps. No.
Sorry, it was just to clarify that I was under the impression from reading the report that the applicant had gone back to the previous application, which was successful in 2012.
No, that's not the case.
Thank you. A couple of other questions. In relation to the ice house, reading the report at paragraph 4.6 on page 15, the last sentence of that paragraph, the retention of this former building is not required under policy as the site falls within the small building group of Tongland. Now, my interpretation of that is that the applicant could have chosen to knock down the remaining walls on the fish house, and I'm just wondering, would he, within his rights to demolish the ice house, or is that protected in any shape or form? I'll just ask you the other question, so we don't go back and forward here. And the other question is on the right of way. We could see from the photographs that there was encroachment onto the right of way by security fencing. Bearing in mind the past history of non-compliance with planning regulations, if the committee were minded to approve this application today, is there any way that we can build in a monitoring of the right-of-way to alleviate any concerns that the local community will have?
Well, I'll start with the right of way. I had consulted the access officer, the council access officer, about the issues which were raised concerning the right of way, and he provided the following response. He said that there are no set rules or criteria as to the the condition a right-of-way should be kept in, all paths become muddy or covered in stones, etc., but this does not count as an obstruction. It's rather an inconvenience. There is likewise no guide on what width a right-of-way should be. It's generally aimed to achieve a minimum of 1.2 metres, though, as this caters for most uses. The right-of-way as existing appears acceptable, and there would be nothing the council could enforce. So I'm not sure what type of monitoring. It's the right-of-way is considered to be accessible at the moment, albeit it's not as wide as it used to be. It is a temporary situation, and it will be improved when the construction works stop. So I'm not sure what sort of monitoring.
I'm just wondering,
Chair,
I'll just bring Steve in. He'll clarify some points for you, Dougie.
Chairs, just really to point out that we are suggesting in condition 8 in the report that we do apply a condition specifically to ensure that that right-of-way is kept open and maintained as a right-of-way for the lifetime of the development. Clearly, the council has other legal powers available to it under access legislation, and that's what Mary's just been referring to there in terms of the response from the access officer. But under planning, if we wanted to include that condition, then we would have powers to then enforce that condition.
You okay with that, Dougie? Jim? Sorry? Oh, sorry. Mary?
Yep, the ice house and the fish house, they are of archaeological interest. The archaeologist was consulted in the application which was submitted in 2011, and he had mentioned that he didn't know how much of the fish house would remain how much of the remains would stay standing during the development works. There's no special protection on these structures to stop the developer removing them unless we could again condition something on this planning application.
could you maybe just clarify that, Mary, in terms of what sort of condition would that be?
Well, we hadn't done so in the previous, we hadn't recommended in the previous application, the 2012 application, but we could say something along the lines of the ice house will not be damaged or demolished during the construction works or for the lifetime of the development.
You happy with that, Dougie? Okay, Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Will the septic tank sit above the floor level of the fish house?
Yes, it would.
I take it that will require pumping.
Yes.
Patsy?
Thank you. Mary, I'm just a little confused. Are we dealing with the permission that was given or referring to it and giving it weight in 2012? Or are we dealing with the refusal that was given in 2017? Or are we dealing with an enforcement issue that has happened in between all of that?
We're dealing with none of the things that you mentioned. I'd included them in the presentation I just gave to help clarify the situation, but maybe it's confused things. We're looking at a completely new application for an amended design to a house, for the erection of a house on the site, as the description of the application says. Alterations to an extension to a derelict building to bring it back into use as a dwelling house.
Can I just ask, so we refused in November, I think it was, and the applicant went on and did some works post that? And that's what the enforcement was for, was it? Yes, sorry, Chair, I understand that, but the reason that it's triggered all this is because there's been works going on and they've had to come for planning permission because they've been doing works that are retrospectively needing planning permission. Is that right? And that is the breeze block walls and the increase in height of the retaining wall by 1.35 metres, which is quite a lot, and the reprofiling of the grounds east of the former fish house, so completely different.
The retrospective works you're talking about, all those works took place back in 2013, around about when the enforcement officer was going on site. So there was an approval for there was approval for a house on site in 2012. The works commenced, but not as per the approved plans. Enforcement action took place, work ceased, an application was submitted to regularise the works which were done, and they also submitted an amended design for the house, and it was that application which was refused in November. The applicant then looked at the reasons for refusal and came up with a new house design, which is what we're looking at today.
Okay. If there's no more questions for the report, I will call for Donald Henry to come forward, please. And you will have 3 minutes to give your presentation. Just when you're ready, you get yourself settled down.
Oh, splash.
In your own time.
Thank you. Could I have the first slide, please? Thank you. Compared with the approved plan, the floor level has been raised 1.4 metres. Side wall is nearer the right-of-way by 1 metre, and floor area is increased by 3 square metres. These details are not found in your report. This is because foundation work in breach of the permit doesn't comply. As a result, the extension apex is to be raised. It'll be closer and longer, creating a structure of greater physical volume whose massing and scale will dwarf the historic fish house due to greater proximity in 2 planes. From the north, the approach is from an elevated position. Looking down onto the extension, the roof line will appear collinear with the heritage element. The centre lines are more closely aligned, losing distinction between the old and new structures, so there's a detrimental impact on design quality that fails OP2 policy. Could I have slide 2, please? At the red oil drum, the north gable of the fish house is to be obscured by a larger porch. The contrast between new and old-facing material is lost in comparison with the 2011 plan, whose success hinged on expressing the fish house over the extension, leaving more historic stone to view. This aspect fails OP1B. Slide 3, please. We come across a huge pile of broken rock carved by digger immediately adjacent to the ice house. The proposal fails OP1B again because the ice house is under threat due to the need to find 2 parking spaces on site. This justifies your particular focus to impose protection measures due to specific warnings found in an internal memo. We are told to accept some fatuous nonsense about bedrock over which no prior correspondence appears to exist concerning the alleged problem it caused to foundations but not to the hillside. Slide 4, please. Down at the southern edge, we see the gable corner, which includes stone from the 13th century abbey. The iron railing dates from 1916, when First World War aircraft parts were made at the Galloway Engineering Company. It was never a boundary, but has an attractive gate with a lock, which provided access to the head of the sluice. This railing needs special attention because it's proposed to erect a 2-metre-high, close-boarded fence whose lower edge will start somewhere in mid-air near the top of the railing. This doesn't respect, quotes, established historic layout required by OP2. It's the little remnants that give a place a sense of identity, and this particular relic should be doubly protected by policy OP1B, because the proposal does not show...
You have 30 seconds to wind up.
Thank you. Sympathetic treatment of the feature. The ground on the far side of the railing shows rubble on top of the landscape, obscuring the previously visible lower wall and basement section of the fish house. Slide 5, please. This big pile of infill is bounded on the riverside by a detestable block wall, which doesn't integrate well with the Solway Coast Regional Scenic Area by any imagination. Mature tree trunks are buried several feet deep in spoil. Policy OP1C should be examined closely. Now, had the extension not been raised by 1.4 metres, along with an imposing panoramic kitchen window invasive of neighbouring privacy, the imposition of a 2-metre wide wooden barrier would not be necessary and the hideous block wall would not have been built. Ladies and gentlemen, the vision of the original architect has been completely undermined by the refusal to heed warnings issued by planning enforcement. Thank you very much.
Please remain in your seat in case any members would like to ask any questions. Members? No?
Can I just ask about the fence that was built in 1916 and what historical value that actually has with the local community?
On the opposite side of the river, there is a factory where most people assume it was just the Galloway car was made there, but actually the history of Tongland dates before that. This gate allowed access to control the water to run the very earliest electricity power generating station in the southwest of Scotland, long before the Art Deco building that you pass on the main road today. And the lade that the water flowed through served various mills, paper mill and other structures. So that is a really important piece of Tongland history to my eye. I could elaborate further, but I think that probably sums it up.
Okay, thank you. If you please take your seat again. Could I call Sue Stanworth from the Tongland and Ringford Community Council, please come forward. Again, you'll have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds left.
Sorry.
In your own time, Sue.
Good morning. Our Community Council is opposed to this latest application and 7 other letters of objection have been submitted, an increase of 350% from the previous application, evidence indeed of the feelings of concern surrounding this. We have again objected to the design and finish, which are not as sympathetic as those previously approved in 2011. The original plan was a good compromise, preserving the old while at the same time incorporating something new, and with a defined distinction between the higher, more prominent fish house and the new, lower extension. This latest proposal fails to adequately highlight the contrast between the old and new. The original plan showed a difference of approximately 1.5 metres. This is now reduced to approximately 14 inches. The roof heights and gutter lines will appear almost identical. The plans detail natural slate on the roof. We understand much of the natural slate used in building projects is imported from Spain. Surely Galloway slate would be more appropriate, and the plans again include the proposal to use larch boarding on exterior walls. Neither of these 2 finishes relate to the character, appearance and use of materials of the surrounding area and are not sympathetic to local build forms. The Planning Committee report para 1.4 states land adjacent to the east is part of the River Dee and lies much lower and is liable to flooding. On none of his planning applications forms has Mr Ainsborough or his agents mentioned this. They have stated risk unknown. And Mr and Mrs Warren from Lower River Cottage North have lived there for 39 years and can confirm the land in question has never flooded. Planning application report point 4.11 acknowledges the applicant has taken unauthorised reprofiling works involving the movement of tons of soil being laid to the eastern boundaries. This levelling has necessitated the building of this 6-course high breeze block wall. We question why the work was carried out. Certainly it appears to increase the size of the garden. Had the area been prone to flooding, it might have been a necessary precaution, but we can find no evidence of this. And this reprofiling has indeed changed the nature and character of the area. What had previously been a gentle slope down towards the river has now vanished. The plans approved in 2011 show the fish house nestling down in its original position. This unauthorised reprofiling has caused a profound and detrimental change to the character of the area, and all natural contours have been lost. Our final objection relates to the ice house, situated on the opposite side of the track. We have grave concerns for the future of this unique and historical structure. Indeed, we applied to Historic Environment Scotland to have it listed.
30 seconds, Sue.
However, regulations state that where a structure is currently subject to a planning application, it cannot be assessed for designation until such application is determined. Andrew Nicholson, council archaeologist, has said in a memo, the proposed septic tank, we would wish to ensure that the excavation and insertion of the tank and its service pipes do not have a negative impact on the ice house. So should it be stressed in the wording of any subsequent consent, and should we consider removal of PD rights with regard to the ice house? Consequently, we're dismayed at the diluted comments of the planning officer.
Sue. That's your 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Any members got any questions? Thank you very much, Sue. Could you please take your seat? Could I call Leslie Ballantyne, the agent, please, to come forward? Again, you have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds in your own time.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee, objections to the revised proposal for the extension to Fish House have been heard, but this is a scheme which the planning officers have been minded to approve. These design amendments to the application, granted in 2011, came about when work on the foundations for the extension began. Originally, the floor level was 1 metre below that of the fish house, but bedrock made it impossible to continue, and the original levels proposed were not possible to achieve. The presence of bedrock has further led to the amended design of the extension having a level difference of 450 millimetres internally due to material conditions of the site towards the northwest boundary with the garden at Pinehurst. However, care has been taken to not express this in the ridge externally, as it was felt that this would detract from the importance of the fish house as the dominant building type within the development. This is the second application for an amended design to that previously approved in 2011. As we have already heard, the first application was refused at the November committee on the grounds that the proposals did not meet the council's aspirations to achieve a high quality of design, especially when compared with the previously approved design for the development. Primarily, this was the omission of a rubble stone base course around the extension. The current design reinstates the stonework base course in direct response to those comments. As Planning Officer's report has noted, my client has chosen to make good and rebuild the fish house. It's not a mandatory requirement. The proposal uses traditional finishes and built forms for the fish house and sympathetic natural materials for the extension. In terms of design, the larch boarding offers a contrast with the stonework of the fish house, again demonstrating the fish house as the dominant built form within the development. The impact on the privacy of the North Cottage garden has been addressed in the Planning Officer's report by suggesting a 2 metre high panel, which is welcome, as we feel it will bring about an improvement in the amenity of both properties compared with the 2011 permission. In terms of landscaping, the scheme will soften the impact of necessary hard landscaping, which at the moment, with the site at its most bare, is very stark. My client welcomes the Planning Officer's recommendation for approval and finds the proposed conditions of approval acceptable.
Thank you very much. Well on time there, Leslie. Any members got questions, Archie?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just questions on the ice house. Is there any plans to renovate or knock down the ice house as part of this application?
I'm not aware of any as part of this application, no.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask why stable bedrock is seen as a problem? Surely, if you're going to build foundations, stable bedrock is an asset. Why was it necessary to build up 1.4 metres on top of the bedrock?
It was that it was having to dig into the bedrock that was the issue. It was the location of the bedrock. It was higher than was anticipated in the original proposal.
Patty?
Just to follow on from that, so it would have been perfectly possible to have dug down into the bedrock, would it? And to comply with conditions?
I think that my client felt that in doing that, it would make the ground around it, especially in relation to Pinehurst Gardens, it would put that at risk. So he felt it wasn't viable to do that.
I would suggest, Chairman, that perhaps it was easier to build it up. What I'm really wanting to know is what proportion of the fish house is part of this new design? Original.
Sorry, could you clarify that?
What part of the original fish house are you incorporating in your new design?
If we could go to the existing elevations. That one, yes. That shows when the original application in 2011 was made, that showed what was remaining at that point. Subsequently, as Mary has pointed out, on the southwest elevation, the gable has actually collapsed. It was a very large stone at the top which came off. But that stone is still retained on site, and as much as possible, the stone will be reincorporated within the rebuilding of the fish house. So essentially, all that remains is being retained and rebuilt using the same profile of the ridge and of the gables. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
I wanted a proportion.
I don't have one. However, I can. Okay.
Any more questions? Okay, could you please take your seat again?
Thank you.
Members are now in session. Archie?
Chair, can I just clarify with the recommendation, the conditions at recommendation 3 about the fence or panel shall remain in place for the lifetime of the development unless replaced by an exact replica or unless otherwise agreed writing by the council. I take it that will be the new fence rather than the existing fence.
Mary?
That condition is talking about the I'll show you on this slide. There's the raised decking there. There were potentially concerns of overlook into the garden for North Riverside Cottage. So that condition was put on so that some sort of screening could be made between the area of the decking and the garden ground. There aren't many details on this plan besides that annotation about what the screen will look like, which is also the purpose of this condition.
You happy with that, aren't you? Do you come back in?
Well, thanks, Chair. I was just hoping we give some other members an opportunity to come back in there. I think looking at the report and the conditions, I would like to see another condition on protecting the ice house in particular in this particular planning application, because I do feel there are some historical values in retaining ice houses as such, and as it's going past a right of way, there is potential for visitors to see that, and hopefully the developer will allow that to actually happen. With that in mind, Chair, I see no reason other than to accept the officer's recommendation, albeit I would have that added condition of keeping the ice house in place.
Yeah, I'll just get Steve to come in on that added condition.
Yeah, Chair, certainly that a condition along those lines would meet the tests that the planning conditions are required to meet. So we could certainly word something appropriate to reflect if that is the will of the committee.
Patsy?
Yes, I'd just like to ask Mr. Rogers. Mr. Henry mentioned that we were losing distinction between the old and the new with regards to OP2. So how does that work? What would we expect to be preserving as a planning committee between old and new buildings like this? And why would he suggest that we were not complying with OP2?
Steve?
Well, I think to some extent that's addressed in the case officer's report. So I'll ask Mary to comment first of all, and then I'll come in as well.
I think the main thrust of Mr. Henry's comments were that the 2012 approval was a different design, which did have, it allowed more emphasis and character of the original fish house building to be left. I'll show you on the elevations. So in these drawings, the fish house building is higher up than the extension. On the gable end, you can also see the way the ground falls away, and there's a lot more stonework visible there. The current proposal, it's a different type of drawing, so perhaps it's not as evocative to look at these pictures, but the same footprint of the fish house is being utilised. The same height of the building is being proposed. The same gable end gradient in the roof is being proposed. So really, in terms of preservation between the 2012 proposal and the current proposal, probably about the same amount of the fish house is, if there's a lot of the fish house to be retained, because as you can see from the photos, there's not all that much left.
Steve? Yeah, if I could just make a comment on the policy situation. Policy OP2 was referred to. So policy OP2 in the local development plan relates to the design quality of new development. And it sets out a series of bullet points which act as guidance for us in assessing proposals. And I think the key one here is that where relevant, proposals should relate well to the scale, density, massing, character, appearance, and use of materials of the surrounding area, and in so doing be sympathetic to the local built forms, as well as respecting the important physical, historic, and landscape features of the site and its vicinity. So that's the basis on which the assessment has been carried out. And as Mary has just outlined, it's our view and our recommendation that the requirements in OP2 have been satisfied by the proposal.
You happy with that, Patsy? If there's no more questions, we've got a proposal to go to recommendations. Patsy?
I'd like to put forward an amendment, please. Or a motion. I don't know whether Councillor Driver has got a seconder. I'll put forward a motion, thank you. And if that's all right, Chairman?
Amendment to refuse.
On the grounds that the proposal is contrary to Local Development Plan Policy OP2. Design quality of the new development is that the proposals do not meet the Council's aspirations to achieve a high quality of design, especially when compared with the previously approved design for the development.
You have a seconder? Ivor?
Chair, I would suggest that we do second that one, because of the fact that actually I think this one looks worse than the last one that came in, with the boarding being replaced by the wall. That just looks like we're trying to fix something that shouldn't be fixed.
Dougie?
Thank you, Chair. I share Councillor Gilroy's concerns about the OP2. I can't see, well, I feel as though we're in the same position we were in November, and I still have the same concerns and in relation to the wording of our last reason to refuse. However, if we go to a vote and the committee is minded to approve the application, I would be supportive of the additional conditions that Councillor Dryburgh has stipulated in relation to the ice house and the wrought iron fence.
Okay, so Archie, have you got a seconder for Elaine? So yours is the motion, Patsy, is to refuse, and Archie is the amendment to approve, subject to the extra conditions that we've discussed. And we've got Ivor as a seconder for the motion, and Elaine as seconder for the amendment. Ivor, you wanted to come back in? No?
Okay, so we'll move to the vote. Councillor John Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Blake.
Amendment.
Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson. He's not present.
He's got his apologies.
Councillor Gilroy. Councillor Giusti.
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman.
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop. Councillor James.
Motion.
Councillor Lever.
Amendment.
Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Amendment.
Councillor Murray.
Amendment.
And Councillor Young.
Motion.
We've got voting was 5 members voting in favour of the motion with 9 in favour of the amendment. So the application is approved subject to the additional conditions suggested by Councillor Driver.
Okay, thank you, Nick. We'll now move on to item 5 on the agenda. It's the use of land for campsite, siting of 30 touring caravans and siting of toilet facilities at Newton Farm campsite, Gatehouse of Fleet. The application reference is 16/P/2/0179, and here to give his presentation is Bill Murray. Bill.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you say, this is an application for change of use of land to form a camping and touring caravan site at Newton Farm, Gatehouse of Fleet. I'll take you through the slides first of all. This is the location plan shown in red. The site includes the access track, so that's the narrow strip running from the site back up to the A75. That's a closer view in terms of the location plan. You'll note it's a coastal location on the side of Fleet Bay, on the northwestern side of Fleet Bay. Again, a closer view of the application site itself, highlighting the coastal location. These are aerial views of the site and surroundings, particularly to highlight the presence of other caravan sites in the area. Members may be familiar with a number of these to the northeast, in other words, to the right and upwards from the red application site is Cardiness. To the southwest, below and to the left, is the long-standing caravan and chalet site at Moss Yard. And then in the extreme left of the picture is the extensive again, long-standing caravan site at Auchinleary. So there's quite a history of caravan developments in the immediately surrounding area, and that's acknowledged in the report, particularly by consultees. Lagan Outdoor Centre, which is a more recent development, lies on the northwestern side of the A75 at or about the same location. This is again a closer aerial view of the site. The caravans you see in the top right-hand corner there are the caravans at Cardiness. This is an aerial view of the site without the overlays, again to highlight the characteristics of the site. I think in that view the particular things to note are the northeastern part of the site, that's on the right-hand side of the access track. That's the wooded and scrubby area within which the proposed toilets are to be located. To the left of the access track, which is the main part of the application site, there are a number of outcrops, rocky and rougher outcrops, highlighted in that view and they again are mentioned in comments from the council landscape architect in terms of the desire to retain them as part of the development, to retain the character of the site. And it has to be said that the proposal does not propose removal of any of these in any event. So these are photographic images of the site. That's the site from the northeastern corner. I was standing on the access track. That's obviously looking towards the coast, and the main part of the site is on my right in that view. So I take a number of other views round in an arc in that direction. This is the site itself. The higher part is more or less level, and then it slopes down towards the coast to the left in that view. This is a view, again, looking directly west, predominantly of the higher part of the site. This is a view of the access track on the approach to the site. Again, this is a closer view, and in that view, in the far distance, right of centre in the view is the wooded and scrubby area within which the toilet facilities are to be located. This is looking back at the same area in the other direction. The toilet facilities would be on your right in that view, where they would be set within and backdropped by the existing tree growth. This is a more distant view looking in a similar direction from the coast, looking back up towards that northeastern part of the site. These are a number of views on the shoreward side of the site boundary, where there has been a history of camping and caravanning on the coast. So that's a view looking back towards the site over that area. So I'm standing more or less on the beach in that view looking back towards the site. Again, looking back towards the site from the beach area. Similar looking inland, and just looking along that beach area simply to highlight the fact that camping and caravanning has been undertaken on that area. These are a number of views of the access. So that's the access junction with the A75 looking from the private access towards the A75. This is the existing junction visibility to the southwest on the 75 and to the northeast. And this is a view of the junction from the opposite side of the A75. These are the plans submitted with the application. That's the general location plan for the site, site layout plan as existing, clearly just showing a field, site layout as proposed, cross sections of the site, topographical survey of the site, and the proposed portable toilet facilities. That's the details of them. They were to be set in an arc. Members will note reference to this part of the proposal in the report. This was the originally proposed toilet facilities, which was a prefabricated unit of a more traditional appearance and a more permanent character. But that was removed by the applicants in an effort to address an initial objection from SEPA. Again, that's what was originally proposed in terms of toilet facilities. On the question of toilet facilities, members will note that we are recommending that the proposed Portaloo type facilities be granted permission on a temporary basis, only at this stage, with a view to a more permanent facilities block in the future. So the key issues in this application are set out in paragraph 4.5. They are principal, design, landscape and visual impact, servicing, traffic generation and road safety. And these issues are considered in turn in the body of the report. In summary, the proposal accords with and can be supported under the current local development plan. And while it's acknowledged that there has been a history of unauthorised activity here for a long number of years, the key point to emphasise here that the granting of approval for this permission, which accords with policy, the granting of approval for this development is the key issues that it's beneficial in terms of an approval being put in place and proper planning controls being put in place so that proper controls can be applied going forward. So the recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions.
Thank you, Bill. Members, questions, Dougie?
Thanks, Chair. Billy, could you possibly go back to the photograph where you pointed out the location of the portable toilets before I ask my question? Yeah, that's that one there. Just for clarification, in terms of the proposal, is that grassy area where the portaloos would be sited?
Could you put your mic on, please, Bill? We're recording.
I'm so used to shouting, sorry. You can perhaps just about make out on the right-hand side of the access track, there is a kind of natural arc in the tree growth, and they would be set back into that. So there would be an arc that sits back against the trees on the far side of the small watercourse. I think our view is that they would be quite well screened in that area, and they would be backdropped by the trees. You'll also note that we have recommended a condition requiring that the portaloos be either a more recessive colour, either grey or green, rather than the kind of traditional blue, to try and assimilate them into the landscape. We've also recommended a condition that they be temporary only for 2 years.
Ian Blake.
Thank you, Chairman. It's in relation, you commented about the fact there's been unauthorised camping there for quite some considerable time. Is it unauthorised in that the owner of the land was not aware and was not being paid for it? Or was that his permission, or his or her permission? I see that there's a portable toilet in position just now, and the ground itself looks extremely well manicured for a wild camping area.
My understanding is that the activities were not without the knowledge of the applicant. I think it has been a camping and caravanning operation by the current applicant for a long number of years, and it has never had planning approval. The only approval that was ever in place, as you'll note from the report, was a certified 5 caravan site from the 80s until I think 2014 when the certificate was removed. So in planning terms, there has never been a permission in place.
Patsy, please.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Billy. Pitch 17, can we see it on this? That there's been, I just wonder, it's change of use up to, except for pitch 17, I wonder what the history of pitch 17 is.
Perhaps just while we have that view on the screen, you'll see, if you look to the right of the access track, you see where the access track goes through the dike at the beach end. There's a kind of white feature there. Pitch 17 would be just above and to the right of that, so it would be to the right of the access track. Concerns from SEPA are that because of the small watercourse that runs down on the right-hand side of the site there, that pitch may be liable to flooding. So they've recommended that, well, they maintain their objection unless that pitch is either removed or relocated to the other side of the access track. We did contact the applicant when we got that final consultation response from SEPA and pointed that out to them and gave them the opportunity to provide an amended plan relocating pitch 17 or removing it. We didn't get a response to that, so the resolution was to recommend a condition that granted no permission for that plot.
You want to come back in, Patsy?
I've just got a second question, if that's all right, Chairman. It's to do with touring, you know, the restrictions with touring caravans. Are they allowed to be there even though they're not being occupied, or have they always got to be taken off site when they're not being used? I just wonder what the regulations are. If you know, you say it's been unauthorised before, I just wondered what planning conditions you wanted to do with regard, or what we can do with regard touring caravans.
The expectation would normally be that touring caravans were removed as such. there is nothing in what you describe as regulations to require their removal, so they could be left there, but they would never become permanent features. They would always have to be capable of being hitched to a car and towed away, you know, different from what become more permanent residential type caravans, which don't have to be easily removable in that way.
Carry on for that, Chair, if I may. But, you know, with static ones, we say they're not to be occupied as permanent residences. Do we do the same with the, I know, I mean, it's unlikely, but it's a possible thing.
I know. Can I just come in?
Because the proposal is for touring caravans and camping as described in the application form and as described in the description of the application. So that's what we would be granting, or you would be granting permission for if you were to go with the recommendation. So because it's described in the application as for touring caravans, there's no need to apply that condition in terms of occupation.
Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. It was with regard to the conditions on the portable toilet and shower units. They have to be removed within 2 years, and there's also a restriction regarding their colour. When they are removed, what happens then if they are going to be replaced by permanent toilet and shower blocks? Do they come back to the Planning Applications Committee or to yourselves? Or should we be putting in a condition with regard to what replaces these portable temporary shower and toilet units?
Officers had a discussion on that very point. I had initially considered a condition requiring agreement of an alternative scheme, perhaps more along the lines of what was originally proposed in terms of a more permanent unit. The decision ultimately was that there was no requirement for that it would be self-evident in the fact that only a temporary permission was being granted for the portaloos, and that they would have to come back to us with an application for an alternative within that 2 years, and, you know, subject to the normal criteria, that application would either be decided on a delegated basis or would be brought to committee.
Should that not be specified within the condition that they come back, though? Because otherwise they might just replace them without realising that they should come back.
Well, the point was that they would need planning permission, so they would need to make an application.
Ivor?
Chair, it's with regard to conditions 11 and 12. Does that mean to say, because they have to be done within 6 months, they can operate just now, but by 6 months' time they have to be up and running, or is it within 6 months they have to have them in place and they can then start operating once they have them in place? That's the geometry of the layout of the road and cutting down the brash and whatever of a metre higher.
Bill?
So just to be clear, your question is whether they would be able to site caravans during that 6 months? No, the condition is worded in such a way that they could continue, you know, if you grant approval today, they can site caravans under that approval, but we've given them 6 months to agree the terms of those points.
If there's no more questions, could I ask Paula Hamilton to come forward? I will give you 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got 30 seconds to go in your own time.
Hi, I'm Paula Hamilton. I'm here to speak on behalf of my boys, Tom and Jack, who do own the farm where the land is being concerned. We just say I'm stood in front of an objector sign here, but we've never objected to the planning permission. We are actually looking forward to these plans going through so that actually things can be put in place so that there is structure. What we just want to say is as well, when you saw in the plans, the road shows that they own the road from the track, from the main road, A75, to the campsite. They don't. They only have a servitude of access over that road. And still on the plans, they are submitting that they do own that road, which is incorrect. And we want clarification, our solicitor wants clarification on the amount of tourers that are down there. In 4.6, it says up to 30 touring caravans, 5.1.1, 30 touring caravans, and then at 5.1.2, it says touring caravans and stroke or tents only. I do see on the plans at 4.14 there is an existing tent pitches on the beach. Are they saying that these are existing so they can have the tents plus the 30 touring caravans? We want actual numbers of the amount of units that are allowed on that pitch. Is it 30 tourists, 30 tents, or is it a mixture, or is it just 30? Tents, tourers, whatever. We need clarification on those numbers because that has implications on the servitude of access that are civil matters to us regarding the water and the access. Also, it stipulates that the toilets have to be on this circle of toilets when they have to go off in 2 years. It doesn't say when those toilets have to be on that property. There is no date telling you when those toilets have to be on. That has a detrimental effect on our business because when there's no toilets there, they use the next field over the wall to the left as their toileting facilities. I have had to pick up sanitary products, toilet paper and fecal waste. It aborts calves if there are cows in that field. Also, when they remove it, that's sort of been stipulated about the removal of the toilets, that the planning has to be in place. So they're not going to disappear. They're going to carry on having tours on there with no toilet facilities. And can we have some clarification on what 4.17 is about the appropriate parking and the 4.18 on the lay-bys and what implications that have upon ourselves as for getting agricultural vehicles in and around when they park up.
You have 30 seconds, Paul.
When they park up to check in, they block the track. We cannot move agricultural vehicles, and they do get rather stroppy when we ask them to move them, and it's to stop this conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. Any members got any questions? Patsy?
Yes, Mr. Sampson, just on the problem with the public lavatories, that you want to know when they're going to be...
Yeah, it doesn't state when they have to be on. So they can have their tour. If the planning goes through today, they will have tourers down there.
I thought it was 6 months.
And when do those toilets have to be on? They're not on at the moment. There's none. They removed the one that was down there yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, please take your seat. Thank you very much. Members in session, Archie?
Chair, I think there were some important questions here from the objector, and maybe get some clarity on all of those questions from the planning officer.
Yes, with your permission, Chair, I can perhaps address these points. On the question of the number of caravans, the approval is for 30 touring caravans. The tents would be more or less unlimited. One point to highlight, perhaps I should have highlighted in my previous comments, was that the existing camping and caravanning area on the beach side of the wall, there's a recommended condition that no permission be granted for further use of that land. I think it's condition... Yes, condition 6, that for the avoidance of doubt, no planning permission is hereby granted for the siting of caravans or tents out with the approved application site, as outlined in red on the drawing. In particular, there shall be no such land use on the seaward side of the southeastern site boundary. So the approval would be for 30 touring caravans and camping within the boundaries of the site only. There would be a prohibition of any other camping on the seaward side of that boundary wall. In terms of the toilet, the question of the portable toilets, when planning permission is granted, there's an immediate requirement that a site licence is required under the council's licensing regime. The requirement for the toilet facilities, the hot and cold water, etc., which is addressed in the body of the report, becomes a licensing issue. And it's for that reason there's nothing specific in the planning report that says when toilets should be sited there. I mean, there would be an assumption that when a caravan site was being approved that the operator would be siting toilets there. If they do not, that is actually a licensing issue. If they're not providing the correct facilities, that becomes a licensing issue. And in terms of the laybys, because it's a private access track, and it's a civil matter in terms of the servitude right of access. We could not impose a planning condition requiring any action to be taken. What we've suggested in the report is that we would put an advisory directive in on any planning permission granted, saying that the developer should consider the option of perhaps providing laybys or passing places to try and help with any potential conflict between camping and caravanners and agricultural activities.
Yeah, my understanding when I first read this report was that if there was 30 tourers, it would be equal amount, you know, like it could be 10 tents and 20 tourers, you know, there was 30 pitches. That was my understanding. Did that seem to answer your questions, Archie?
Well, they weren't my questions, Chair, they were the objectors' questions, but I think when you look at people who do caravan and things like that, sometimes they have extra family, they have awnings on the side of the caravans, they may actually have some tents and things like that for additional family members. So it's getting that sort of clarity, I think, for the objector. I'm quite happy with what Bill has actually said, because of the licensing side of thing. It is not a planning issue, therefore we have to make that any recommendations on planning issues as opposed to licensing issues. Because it's a private road, it is a civil matter between the owners of the site, and again, that's not a council issue or a planning issue for us to deal with. I think, you know, I'm quite clear on where I want to go with this. I think it hits well with, you know, the regional tourism strategy and things like that with regards to tourists. I'm quite prepared to go with the recommendations. And perhaps Bill can maybe send some advice to the objector on the licensing side of things for that.
Yeah, thank you. Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. I'm also a bit concerned about this unlimited numbers of tents, because you know, as Councillor Driver says, I mean, there may be people with pup tents or awnings, but equally there may be additional people camping with tents, and there's a restriction of not less than one car parking space per caravan pitch, but presumably there will be car parking, or may well be car parking associated with the tents, so you could have unlimited numbers of cars arriving because people are camping by tent instead. And also, you know, if you have unlimited numbers of tents, there will be pressures on the sanitary facilities as well. So I'm not convinced that we shouldn't be restricting the numbers of tents. So maybe having, you know, no more than 30 touring caravans and or tents, and I don't know if there's a way you can express that so it's not tents associated with the caravans, but you know, I think that might be a preferable condition in my view.
Ivor? Billy, do you want to respond to Elaine?
Yes, Chair. I think it would be possible to frame a condition in such a way that you were granting permission for 30 pitches, if you will, for either caravans or tents, so that there would be a limitation then in number, so it would be a total of 30 pitches, and that would give the option of a caravan or a tent. In doing that, I don't think it would be reasonable to try and restrict an annex type tent with a caravan or an awning as such. I think if it was one family, for example, or a group that had a caravan and a tent, I think you would just have to accept that as a possibility. But yes, I think it would be possible to frame a condition that limited it to 30 pitches.
Going to take Ivor and then Katie.
It's with regard to the passing places, civil matter being the access, etc. If that's a civil matter, how isn't the first 10 metres of the private access track, which belong to somebody, why is that not a civil matter, and why are we putting a condition on with that one, but not on the other one, please?
Bill?
Yes, Chair, thank you. The difference is that the works recommended in the conditions can be carried out within the road verge. In terms of the Road Scotland Act, the road's verge is everything from the public road carriageway back to the defined boundary, and where there's no defined boundary, a notional 2 metres. In this case, there is a widened verge there, so there's quite an extensive widened verge, and the recommended works can be carried out within, see there's quite a wide verge there, and also in the other direction. So the visibility displays and the alterations to the access can all be carried out within the public road verge. So the question of it being a private track does not come into it because the road verge is under the control of Transport Scotland as Trunk Roads Authority.
You want to come back in, Ivor?
12C. The first 10 metres of the private access have been surfaced in bituminous materials. That is a private road, therefore a civil matter, I would have thought. It's not 2 metres off the road verge.
I take your point, the condition does refer to the private access there. That could be removed, but being reasonable, it seems unlikely that any party would object to the access being surfaced.
Chair, yeah, if I could just clarify, the reason that that's there is as a result of the consultation with the Trunk Roads Authority, bearing in mind the A75 is a trunk road. And the reason they've recommended that we do that is to avoid creating a hazard on the trunk road. So it's for that reason that they have suggested we put that condition on. That's a fairly standard condition from Transport Scotland, requiring where a private track or a road joins the trunk road network, then they need to make sure that the geometry of that junction is absolutely right and is not going to cause a safety issue for the trunk road.
You want to come back in, Ivor?
I don't have any issue with it, but my understanding is if you can't actually enforce it, so therefore the people who are having the caravan can't actually implement it, that's an unreasonable condition. Now, if the owner of the track decides, hell menges, I'm not letting you put tar down my track, then you can't enforce that condition, therefore the planning application falls. Now, I actually think it needs to be in here because I think that's a good idea so that people can get off the road and pass. But can we actually implement it?
Bill?
Just to be clear, the planning application doesn't fall if they were unable to comply with a single condition. You know, that's factually incorrect. I mean, if they were unable to comply with that condition, we would have to look to address that. And you're right, because it's a private access and it's a civil matter. At the end of the day, one of the owners could refuse to allow them to do that. But if they were to do that, worst case scenario, it does not mean that the whole planning application falls. It just means that they were unable to comply with that part of that condition.
Thank you. I'll take Katie, and then Jim, and then Ian Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've discussed, or it's been mentioned, the land use on the seaward side of the southeastern site boundary. Who owns that piece of land? Because obviously you've got beach there. Is the beach Crown Estate or is it a private beach? And then you've got a track, and then there's a bit of scrub, and then there's an actual boundary line. Where does the site actually end? And if the site ends on the boundary line, how does the land use affect this planning application if out with the boundary we're putting in stipulations? It's just some clarity really on that.
I don't know who owns that land. The condition simply emphasises that permission is being granted for camping and caravanning within the defined application site, and therefore no permission is granted out with that site.
So is it possible to have clarity as to what happens if, because in the pictures that were shown, there's clearly is camping down there. I've been on that site myself. I've seen the camping down there. What happens in that situation? Because obviously it's clearly there's a historical use of that. What happens? Because it is mentioned if we're citing this land in the planning application, surely we must know that information if we're going to cite that piece of land.
You're asking what happens, do you mean what happens if camping continues on that area of land? well, if permission is granted today with that recommended condition that emphasises the fact that there will be no camping out with the site, the facts of the matter remain that camping anywhere down there at the moment is unauthorised. If it were to continue out with the approved site boundary, it would be unauthorised, and therefore consideration could be given to enforcement action to require that to cease.
We don't want to get into what ifs.
No, I just wanted to have the clarity of what is the law for wild camping, though, because that is a legal status. I know on Loch Lomond there has been there's been restrictions put in to stop wild camping, but surely the site would be classed as wild camping. I've just wanted clarification of what the legal ramifications are on wild camping sites.
We're here to discuss the papers in front of us, Katie. We're not here to discuss illegal camping, wild camping, whatever. We're here to discuss these papers and whether we should approve them or not. Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Condition 9 refers to construction of a dry stone deck. Could we have an indication what length of deck would be required?
Put your mic on, please, Bill. Sorry.
It would be the full length of the northwestern site boundary, so that's the light line that runs from the access track at the top right to the other boundary treatment at the bottom left. Apologies, Councillor, I don't have an exact length to hand at the moment.
It does seem a significant length of dike, and I would suggest also a significant investment. That, this is a condition which might be difficult to comply with.
That's not really for us to debate whether, they've got the money to do a dike, Jim. I'll take Ian Blake, please.
Thank you, Chairman. There's 3 points. The first one, I don't really know what difference it would have made to this application, but I wondered why it didn't come to us as a retrospective, as there quite clearly a camping or caravanning operation running. We heard from Mrs. Hamilton that the cars and caravans block the road while checking in, so it's quite clearly it's a running operation. So I wonder why it's not retrospective. Secondly, the temporary toilets. Was this at the applicant's request, the temporary toilets for 2 years, or was it because of your involvement in it? I would have thought it would have been better going straight to a traditional toilet block rather than temporary for 2 years, and that removes any issues. And also that finally the comment about checking in. Does the applicant have the facility for having a lay-by there at the property when they're checking in, so that would remove the blocking of any farm vehicles?
Do you want to respond, Bill?
Trying to take them in reverse order, the question of blocking a private access while caravans are checking in is not a matter for us to consider as planning officers under this application. In terms of the temporary toilet facilities, that was a proposal from the applicant. They chose to go down that route. Initially, they proposed the facilities block that I showed in the images with a new septic tank. SEPA objected to that, but they essentially objected to that on the basis of lack of information on how the foul drainage was to be disposed of from that new septic tank. Without any discussion with us, the applicant chose to amend the scheme in such a way that they proposed temporary toilets. On that basis, SEPA removed their objection, but as you'll see from the report, from a planning perspective, while that may address SEPA's objection, we don't consider that to be an acceptable solution in the long term, and therefore that's why the recommendation is that they should be temporary only. In terms of previous unauthorised activities, there have been unauthorised activities there for a long number of years, and that is acknowledged in the report. Why nothing was done about that in the past is not a decision that I would be party to. I can only assume, however, that it was considered that formal enforcement action was not expedient at those times. I do know for a fact that there have been a number of visits over the years from planning officers and environmental standards officers from the licensing point of view in terms of the activities there. And we've now come to the point where we have managed to get this application before us to regularise that use, and we see that as a benefit. And again, that's acknowledged and addressed in the report.
Okay, thank you. You want to come back in, Ian?
Yeah, just the first point, I was asking why it didn't come before us today as a retrospective permission. I appreciate there's been no enforcement, but it was clearly an operation.
Chair, strictly speaking, there's no such thing as retrospective planning permission in terms of legislation. It's a planning permission. It may be submitted retrospectively, but there's no such thing as retrospective planning permission. I think if you look at... Sorry?
Chair, I would challenge that, because in the previous one it was partly retrospective. So this was information coming to us as members on a planning committee that had partially retrospective planning permission. So there is such a thing as retrospective.
It's a shorthand term that has come into general usage, but there is actually no such thing in legislation.
I'll just ask Steve to clarify that, please.
As a retrospective planning permission.
What Bill is saying is correct. However, the purpose of the description of development is to give people an indication of what's being applied for. So in situations where there is a degree or an element of retrospection to the proposal, it's considered that that should be flagged up in the definition of the development. And that partly is in response to issues that have been raised in previous planning application meetings by members. I think we're now a lot more rigorous in terms of, within the definition, describing where something is retrospective, so it's absolutely clear that something's either already been built, already partially been built. In this particular case, you could argue that this is a use of land, which changes according to seasonality, for example. So it's not a permanent form of development as such, and so to describe it as retrospective might not be as appropriate as if it applied to a building that was already there, for example.
So basically the difference is that the previous application there was some previous planning applications. On this one, it's about use of land that's never had an application on it before. So, you know, retrospective is previous planning applications to buildings. This is a brand new application because there hasn't been anything in place before.
Well, going back to what I said earlier on, you know, the caravan club themselves, you don't need planning permission to site these sites, and obviously whoever used it in the past, they flouted the caravan club laws, which means no more than 5, and obviously there could have been 10, 20 caravans there, so they had their licence taken off them. But this, you're probably right, Archie, it's a brand new application, but you know, the precedence was set, you know, with the caravan club having a licence there in the first place. We'll take Patsy, Archie and Elaine, and then we'll go to recommendations. Is that where you wanted to come in? No, you just... Well, I'll take Patsy, Elaine. You'll need to come at the front, Elaine. I'll take... Right. Patsy, Elaine and Doogie.
Thank you. Just a couple of points, which is really just to reassure Mrs. Hamilton, because she's come here as an objector, but she's not really objecting, she's just wanting things clarified. So I'm going back to the facilities, the lavatories and so forth, and it's part of the application, but it then goes on to being a licensing issue if they're not implemented, which was her concern, because it is a conflict with her agricultural business. I can absolutely understand that. So if the temporary ones are not put in the appropriate timescale, that goes to a licensing application, if you like, or a licensing issue. I mean, after this, does this site get a license for what we're giving permission for, with the conditions that we have put in as planning authority? If that not complied with, then the licensing authority comes in and has the ability to enforce the conditions that we put in there. And if that doesn't happen, the planning permission is rescinded. What happens? Because she's obviously concerned about it, and I think we need to clarify that for her and for ourselves. And the other thing, just on the recommendation, I just wonder if, on recommendation 1, if we haven't got it there about the 30 touring, if we just change the wording to touring and tent pitches, is that enough, do you think?
Do you want to respond, Bill?
Yes, Chair. On the licensing issue, first of all, I would draw your attention to paragraph 2.9. That's the consultation advice from the Council Environmental Health Officer. Under subparagraph A, it says, under the Caravan Sites and Control of Development Act 1960, the operator is obliged to apply to the local authority for a caravan site licence. When planning permission is granted, they then need to apply for a caravan site licence. One of the conditions of such a licence would relate to the requirement for toilet facilities. That is addressed in the body of the report in paragraph.
It's really there.
Yes. Under servicing in paragraph 415, that's where we're discussing the temporary toilet arrangements and the need for hot and cold water, and I state in that report, whilst this is essentially a site licensing issue which would be addressed by environmental health, so it is a licensing issue, the toilets, the water supply, the hot and cold water in the toilet facilities. We've said in our report that in our recommendation that we don't think longer term, from a planning point of view, continued use of temporary toilets is acceptable.
Okay. And would the first recommendation at 5.1, if we popped in there, it says no more than 30 touring caravans shall be sited at any time. If we put in 30 touring or tent pitches should be sited, would that be sufficient? Would that be all right, do you think, as a condition? Would that be effective?
Do you want to come in, James?
Yeah, we can certainly reword that condition to reflect that.
Okay, Elaine, and then Dougie.
Okay, I was going to move that we approve the application, but with changes to some of the conditions. So the first one would be the one that Patsy just referred to. So it says, I think it would have to be no more than 30 pitches shall be sited on the land. I think at any one time would probably come out, because presumably the pitches would be permanent. The other thing, on condition 4, I would suggest that we add, and thereafter replaced by permanent toilet and shower units, because otherwise theoretically you could just take them off and put them back on again. So that gives them 2 years to work with SEPA to find a permanent solution to the toileting issue. And then condition 13, we'd have to take out the word caravan, so it reads that vehicle parking at the rate of no less than 1 car parking space per pitch shall be provided. And with those alterations, I'd like to recommend approval.
The first and the third point, yes, these conditions could be easily amended. On condition 4, I would still, my view would still be that there was no need to add the sentence that you're suggesting, because I think in your words, to paraphrase, you said that there's no reason why they couldn't remove them and immediately replace them. Well, they couldn't actually do that because they'd been breach of the terms of the conditions, and if they simply replaced temporary toilet facilities, they would not have planning permission. So that would be a breach of planning control and appropriate
So if they
action.
put new temporary
Could be
units
taken.
on it, they would still be in breach? If they put new temporary units on, they would still be in breach? Even though they'd taken the original ones off?
Yes.
They would, okay then. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the points raised by Councillor Murray. I just want to go back to the point raised by Councillor Hagman. I think we need to be very careful here. Land Reform Act 2003 allows camping on unenclosed land. If we look at condition 6, I think there's a danger that we could be impacting on that legal entitlement, and I'm just wondering if condition 6 should be removed or amended to stipulate that this does not affect wild camping under the land reform legislation, to ensure that there are no legal implications out of this particular planning application.
We're looking at a planning application here, and if we go back to the first area bill where you've got it marked off as the planning application site, it doesn't include the Crown Estate. So, well, I'm presuming that's Crown Estate land because it's shoreline. That would not, any of these conditions would not be affected by anything outside of the application site. So therefore, it's covered.
Yeah, it looks as if it's related to just the application site itself. Anything out with that, you know, you want to come back into?
If I could, I fully take the point that Archie makes here. I just think there is a potential for a conflict here, and it could simply be addressed by adding a line that basically says, notwithstanding the rights of enclosure within the Land Reform Act, because condition 6 does make reference to that area out with the planning application site.
First point to make would, I defer to Steve if I'm wrong in this, but in my view it would be inappropriate to refer to other legislation in a planning condition. It's not something, I don't think that would be competent to refer to other legislation in the planning condition. If it would help members, perhaps that condition could be condensed simply by removing the final sentence, so that it's just for the avoidance of doubt, planning permission is only granted for the application site itself.
Members happy with that? So we go to recommendations. Agreed? Subject to the changes. Of course. Okay, thank you. Now we move on to number 6 on the agenda, the erection of a cycle-stroke footbridge with associated ramps and abutments over the River Cree at land adjacent to Goods Lane, Newton Stewart, planning application number 18/0058/4. And here to give a presentation is Mary Mitchell.
Hello again. This proposal, as we've just heard, is for the erection of a bridge for the use of cyclists and pedestrians. This bridge is essentially a replacement for the former Sparling footbridge, which was located about 100 metres upstream from the application site. The Sparling footbridge was damaged and then removed following the floods in 2016. The bridge currently proposed is considered to be an improved bridge because the impact the bridge will have on localised flood events and the degree to which the bridge itself is impacted on by a flood event will both be dramatically reduced. Additionally, the accessibility of this bridge in terms of bicycle, wheelchair and buggy usage would be hugely improved. This development will link 2 core footpaths which run on either side of the river. These are existing footpaths. It will also link the housing at Minigaff, which is on the east side of the river, with the town centre facilities on the west side of the river. I'll just show you the slides. So you can see the site is in the middle of Newton Stewart. The former footbridge is actually shown on this plan as well, up there. This is a supermarket here, a supermarket here. The housing at Minigaff, which I referred to earlier, is over here. What else do we have? This is an industrial estate, is down here. And this is the River Cree. The footbridge itself, the 2 sides of the banking are at different heights. This side here is the bridge links into the same height, but on the east side the banking's much lower, which is why this long ramp is being proposed. It's a Verdendeel truss is being used. It's a stainless steel truss, this sort of crescent shape. It's to be painted and the balustrades are to be timber. You can see a reinforced concrete is to be used for the structure of the ramps on either side. These are sections of the bridge and the ramp. Handrail details came in a wee bit later. They were an amended addition. You can see these are the timber spindles here. The handrail is proposed to have LED lighting underneath the handrail, which will be quite, which will be a nice sort of subtle way to light the bridge. Okay, this is looking down the river here. This is the old concrete abutments of the former Sparling Bridge, and our site is just round this bend down here. So the bridge will start about here. This is one of the supermarkets up here, and this is Goods Lane here. The bridge will go directly across the river. These 2 small trees will need to be removed. Again, the bridge will start here, and the ramp will go here, and the bridge over that way. This is looking up Goods Lane. Oh dear. Do I? Right, okay, we're working again. So this wee round tree, so the bridge will come to about where these 2 trees are here. This is the existing footpath on the west side of the river. This is the footpath on the east side of the river. And the ramp will start round about here, I think, and sort of work its way up to more or less where that tree is, which is to be removed. And this is the point on the opposite side of the river. Again, the footpath on the east side. The recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. This proposal is seen as very beneficial to the Newton Stewart area.
Thank you. Any members got any questions for the presentation? Patsy?
Yes, you mentioned that you were going to paint it. Is that not, I mean, I can understand if it's wooden, it needs protection, but is paint the best thing to use?
It would be the steel truss which would be painted. There's a condition at the end of the report which requires clarification on all the final finishes for the bridge. So we'll get more details on that then. But it was just the steel would be painted. I think the timber was to be left natural.
Does it not need something to stop it rotting?
I presume it will be some sort of treated timber, but again, condition 1 will require these details to come in.
Doogie. Thanks, Chair. Mary, it's just to clarify paragraph 1.8. There's reference to the flood protection scheme in Newton Stewart, and you say in your report that it is not anticipated that any adjustment to the design of the bridge will affect the building of the wall. I'm assuming that the flood wall would be built after the bridge is actually built, and how sure are you that you won't be, by the construction of the bridge, creating problems, engineering problems for the flood protection scheme?
The bridge is part of these flood protection schemes coming into Newton Stewart, and the design of both are being looked at by the same group of people. So I'm sure they're working together. The bridge, again, I presume, will be constructed first. The flood wall is still at developmental stages, and I've seen no plans for what that's going to look like. The main area it would impact on, so they've drawn an indicative flood wall on this plan. On that west side of the river, so there's the fly wall which comes out from the edge of the ramp on that side, maybe longer or shorter. It's fairly minor changes. There's also potentially tree works with regard to the flood wall, but again, those can all be dealt with later, and I don't think they've got a huge bearing on the construction of the bridge itself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary. It's just reassuring to know that these projects are running in conjunction with each other, and that will hopefully remove any problems in the future. Thank you.
Any more questions for the report? If not, we'll go into session. Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I think this is part of the flood prevention scheme in Newton Stewart, and it's a very welcome part. It's had a lot of community engagement, both with members of Community Council and the community at large in Newton Stewart. They have now come to a design which the biggest majority of people are happy with. This moves on to the next stage of getting funding and the rest of carrying for such transfer out. So happy to move the recommendations.
Move to the recommendations. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Now move on to item 7 on the agenda. This is the erection of a dwelling house, installation of septic tank and soakaway, and the erection of general purpose agricultural building at field between Chapmanton Farm and Hillowtown Farm, Dunmuir Road, Castle Douglas, planning reference number 17/1982/full, and this planning was called in by Councillor James. Before I go to Judith, I would like to ask if Councillor James, have you anything to add to your reasons for calling in?
Yes, thank you. I hope members will agree with me there was unusual aspects to this case that meant it might be best decided by the committee. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can we go to Judith's report, please?
Pardon me. Thank you, Chair, for that. Yeah, this is an application for a dwelling house out at a site near Chapmanton, Castle Douglas. The application site is on the edge of the town, just out the Dunmuir Road. The site's indicated in red on the slide, and the applicant also owns adjacent land to the north and west, which is outlined in blue on the slide, and it's split into 3 paddocks, of which the application site forms part of the first paddock. There is an existing access into the site from the public road and a track to an existing agricultural building which is at the south of the site. Moving on to the site plan, this has actually been orientated around about so that the public road is now at the top. So if I can, I'll point out so this is the public road with the access, proposed access here, proposed dwelling house, associated parking. This is an existing agricultural building here, and this is a proposed agricultural building, this one, on the western boundary. So the existing access would be maintained, but the proposed new access would be in a bit from where it is at the moment, and you'll see that on the slides. At the bottom of the slide, just here, is a gate going through. This is the existing track, comes down round to the existing shed, and this continues up, which gives access to the other paddocks. The drawing shows a deceleration lane which has been deemed unsuitable by the council roads officer. However, the roads officer has not objected to the application, subject to the inclusion of conditions. Moving on to the proposed dwelling house elevations, the dwelling house is single storey. The front elevation facing east in the top right-hand side of the image is the one which would be facing the public road with the porch on the front. Dwelling house floor plan is 4-bedroom dwelling house with full height glazing to the dining room, which is the top left-hand side. Proposed elevations and floor plan of the general purpose building. The building would have one open side which would be facing the public road. That's in the top right-hand side of the image. The building would be clad in matte grey profiled steel to the external walls with the same cladding to the roof with roof lights either side. This is a view into the site from the public road, the C12. I've tried to indicate where the application site would be, so you can see that the existing access goes in and then turns left down. And just on top of the hedge, kind of in the centre, you can see the roof of the existing building that's on the site at the moment. This one's taken just inside the site, looking down towards the existing building, which also has open side, which is facing us in the far centre of the image. And you can see the existing access track just running on the inside of the site down. This is taken from the corner, looking along the southern boundary of the site, showing the end view of the existing building. And this is taken on the far side of that building, looking further along, so you're seeing the end of the paddocks. The application site goes as far as the fence that you can see with the gate in it, and it also includes the part of the track, which is really grass, that runs from the gate on the left-hand side, which runs up to where the fence line is. This is taken really from where I was standing before, looking back towards the road. So it includes most of the application site except for the building, which is immediately on my right-hand side as I'm standing there. I've pointed out the existing access, which you can kind of just see through the hedge and the access track. This is just taken back at the access, looking north along the public road from there, and shows the nearest neighbour dawdled into across the road. So in conclusion, the housing in the countryside policy requires it to be demonstrated that there's an operational need for a dwelling at this location, which is based on the specific requirements of the business concerned. The labour report in this application has been based on the total area farmed by the applicant, which is about 86 hectares. However, at this location, the applicant only owns just over 4.5 hectares, and no details of specific activities have been provided, of activities carried out here have been provided. Therefore, it's not been satisfactorily demonstrated that this small area of agricultural land can support a viable farming business and farmhouse in the long term without reliance on rented land or other income, and the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you, Judith. Any members got any questions on the report? If not, David?
Thank you. Either for Judith or Steve, just a clarification here on the way we assess these things. My understanding is that we firstly look at the LDP, then we look at the supplementary guidance, and then in this case, a development management practice note has been cited. I know that we have input into LDP and supplementary guidance, but just for the benefit of new councillors such as myself, I'd like to know how these practice notes are arrived at and what is their significance.
Do you want to come in, Steve?
Chair, yes, thank you. I'll respond to that. As Councillor James says, the two key documents really here are the LDP and the supplementary guidance. Now, the supplementary guidance, in effect, forms part of the adopted development plan, so it is effectively part of the LDP and therefore carries exactly the same weight in terms of decision making. The development management practice notes that you've referred to are really guidance notes aimed to try to assist applicants. They're directed at applicants to try to guide them through the complexities of the policy and the supplementary guidance, and they're intended to assist applicants with providing information that's going to meet the requirements of the policy.
Just to follow up, so would I be right in thinking that 2.1 here, which states calculation of standard labour requirements, hours worked based on specific work duties carried out at the farm or business, this should specifically discount rented land and contracted out by the business. That only appears in the note, the guidance, the development practice notes.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's correct, and it relates back to the policy requirement for the applicant to evidence that this is a sustainable and viable business operation that requires the presence on site of a dwelling.
Andrew?
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. So, if we're looking at the business model of the actual business, how come there's no business plan in front of us here, if that's what we're determining this on?
Judith?
Sorry, I didn't actually hear what you said, I'm afraid.
Apologies, if we're looking at aspects of this business and the future of this business, then how come we don't have a business plan to judge this on? We're just doing guesstimates on how their business might go.
All of the information that's submitted by the applicant forms part of the case officer's assessment of the application, and all information submitted by the applicant would then be on e-planning and publicly available. With regard to business plans, obviously there has to be a recognition that they may contain confidential financial information which a business would not wish to be shared in public, and so therefore we can only share that information with the agreement of the applicant, but in any case it would have to be redacted. I don't know what detail has been provided in relation to this particular application. Maybe Judith can fill us in.
Yeah, there was financial advice which showed the financial state of the business and for the next few years, which I have addressed in my report in 4.15, a set of accounts and financial forecasts were submitted with the application, which is based on the whole business and not just the applicant's landholding at the site. The figures appear to indicate that the business has sound financial base, but given that there was no support for the principle of the development, I didn't consider scrutinising the figures. But on the surface of it, they appear to show that the business was viable, but that was the whole business, the 86 hectares rather than the 4.5. But there wasn't a business model, but we just looked at the information that was submitted and assessed the application on that.
Ivor?
So what we're being told is the financial figures showed that this 4-hectare farm, with the additional land that he uses, is sustainable.
On the face of it, the figures appear to show that, yes, but...
Ian?
It's actually on a similar point. I think your comment was that there were no evidence to show that there was a sustainable business on the land that he owns, but the business overall is viable. Given that the applicant has to reside somewhere, and he doesn't have control over the other land that he rents, so it would appear to be an obvious one that he would wish to build a house where he could supervise his business on land that he owns, and this is the only possible land that's there.
Do you want to respond? No. Is that just more or less a statement rather than
no? I
question?
appreciate we're not really in session yet. It was more of a
there's quite a few points in the report where we've I've tried to highlight. In paragraph 4.5, it's acknowledged there are particular circumstances when a house in a rural area is required. Whether a house is considered to be essential depends on the specific needs of the business concerned, and the needs of the business that we would assess would be at this location. In this instance, we haven't been given any information to assess the business activities at this location. This is only about 5% of the total land holding. The other land is rented land, I believe, which has been advised not to be included in the assessment.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the point I was going to raise has possibly been answered already, but I'm just looking for clarification. My understanding is, and you could perhaps clarify this, is we're not here to determine whether the business is successful or not, but whether the house is essential to that business. And has there been information provided by the applicant that demonstrates that this house is essential for the business? Because I think just some clarity on what our decision is being based on, not on the success of a business, but on whether the house is essential to that business. And if that information has been provided.
Yes, that is correct. It's the information needs to be provided to show that a dwelling house is essential for the needs of the business at that location, and the land holding at that location is 4.5 hectares.
Yeah, I think before we get bogged down in the ins and outs and the rights and wrongs, if your question is related to the presentation, that's fine, and we'll need to go into session. Ivor?
Chair, it's just under the report states that the reason for the house being on site is the fact that that's where the main lambing, calving activity happens, and it will also be the case that I would take it if you've got a pedigree sheep herd, that would be where it would be based, and the amount of work involved in a pedigree sheep herd is considerable when you've all the dressing of the sheep and etc. So surely that would be a case that you need a base for that to actually do it. Now, that's where you go to lamb your flock. Surely that's where you would put your house. That makes common sense. I don't know of another farm in the southwest that lambs miles away from their actual farmsteading on the land that they own.
Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. I'm referring really to 4.7. Is the issue, obviously the businesses are on rented land, but is one of the concerns that the rented land is remote from the application sites? The one's at Borg, two at Borg, one's at Kelton, and one's at Hawkerver. So is the argument that he doesn't really need to have the house on that site because it's not going to make him near to any of the business on the rented land?
Thank you. The issue is that the discounted land the rented land has to be discounted according to the practice notes, so that's not taken into account. And the operations that are carried out at this location, at the application site, have not been submitted to be assessed. There were some sheep there last time I went, but we don't know the detail of the operations at this site.
Now, that wasn't actually the question I was asking. The rented land, there would be no need, well, it appears to be no need for a house at that site in order to do the business on the rented land, because the rented land isn't actually near the site.
Yes.
Okay, no more questions. We'll go into session. David?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Judith and Patrick Hannah in his absence for allowing me several meetings and several phone calls on top of that along the way, and also the applicants who are kind enough to meet me on one or two occasions as well. And it was interesting watching both sides as the pendulum swung back and forth over, well, in my period, half a year, but I think the application came in almost or over a year ago. And the applicant was able to sort of counter concerns along the way, and until the last moment when late in the day this new worry about the proportion of land which was not owned by the applicant surfaced. Now, members will be aware that because there have been no objections to this proposal, that the applicant has no right to speak for himself today, and that's perhaps an anomaly that the committee might want to address on another occasion. But for members' benefit, and if I could command their patience for a while, I'd like to go through somewhat systematically through section 4 here and sort of illuminate some of the arguments put forward by the applicant to counter the concerns made by the planning officer. So I'll start with 4.4, and the overarching policy is, of course, the essential application needs of agriculture, appropriate rural location. Well, if I can just deal with the location here, as we've seen, it's really a good site and very well drained. It's good for access to A75. And as been pointed out already, this is the only land owned by the family, so they couldn't actually invest or shouldn't invest in any other location. So I think if it's going to be a location for the base, then it has to be here. In 4.5, it alludes to the nature and demands of the work concerned make it essential for the person to be engaged in the business, to live at or very close to the site of the work. Well, in 4.10, the applicant lists many good reasons why you'd want to be there, but mainly I would say it's the amount of work. He's working at least 75 hours a week, and the round-the-clock nature of the business, a lot of deliveries, there are animal welfare issues which could only be coped with if you're actually living on site. I don't see how he could live not on site and cope with these issues. It's amazing he's achieved what he's achieved already, but this would be a prolongation and an expansion of the business. I don't think what he's doing at the moment is sustainable. It will only be sustainable if he has this location. In 4.7, this is where we question the ownership. His family, as I understand it, his grandfather, this is his land here where they have the 4 hectares. Over 10 years, he's actually been able to build up his land holding, and there's every possibility that he will have more land in the future. So he's proven to us that he can actually acquire and hold on to land. So I understand that's a very important test for the viability of the business. If it was just rented land that he acquired 6 months ago, it would be different. But I think he's got a track record of proving that he's got viable land. This land at the moment is somewhat dispersed throughout the region, but I think it's logical that if there is a base, he will add to land around that base. And 4.8 mentions the fact that he has a full-time job, but the job and the business are essentially one. His job, driving for an agricultural business, means that's where he's out and about, meeting other farmers and making deals. It's just a question, he couldn't with that employer work as a self-employed contractor, otherwise he would do. So it's essentially one, and he is working, as stated here correctly, is about 75 hours a week. The 4.9, the shed that is on site is it wasn't mentioned perhaps in the planning application that was sent in, but it's in any effect totally inadequate to be the hub shed, and I think it's not a very attractive building. It is a building that's there at the moment, and new build at this location will actually add to the way the area is presented and the look of the area. In 4.10, there the applicant is mentioning the reasons why he needs to be on site. I think it's the last 3 that are particularly relevant here. The long hours, the need to unload and load livestock at various different times around the clock, the lambing and calving, which was mentioned by my colleague there, and the need to operate an office, which I think was an omission in their planning application. They didn't actually designate a room. It was wrongly designated as a bedroom rather than an office, but that would be a benefit to have it there. 4.11 talks about the normal hours. I think it's clear if you're working 75 hours a week, you're probably not working all those normal hours, so that's totally clear. And we mentioned the deliveries and animal welfare, so that he covered that. 4.12, agricultural theft is well known and prevalent in our area, so I think there is a legitimate concern, although he hasn't actually presented statistics to back that up. I think we've all heard about it in the various community councils that we attend and the police reports. There was mention of travel, and I mentioned that I think if he's going to have a base, then there's every likelihood that the land would tend to congregate around that base, but specifically to reduce the travel, they actually would like a base. He's actually working, I would say, beyond the limit of what a human can do, but he does wish to expand this business, and that can only take place through having a hub. And I think another essential need to be having a base is witnessed over the last few days, where I think in one day alone, due to the snow, he lost 50 lambs. Now that wouldn't have happened if he'd been able to have that lambing at a good solid base on the north side of Castle Douglas. That just wouldn't have been an issue. So you've actually flagged up yourself here that it appears the business is on a sound financial basis, so that box is ticked. But in 4.16, we're alluding to temporary permission for a non-permanent accommodation. Well, that wouldn't really work, because that wouldn't allow the applicant to expand. There'd be no gain in financial credibility if he only had a temporary place, and it just wouldn't make any sense. And I think if you're working 75 hours a week, temporary accommodation is just going to push you even further into the limit of what's sustainable. But the presumption against counting land that he doesn't own would still be there, so that there's no point in developing it through a temporary allowance to be there. It just doesn't help the situation. 417 tells us about section 75, that we don't tend to impose that requirement. That's a pity. I know the applicant would have been very comfortable with that, because he's totally committed to staying and farming at this location, and it's because we don't have that ability. I think it wasn't he that caused that, and I don't think he should be punished by the fact that we haven't got that means available to us. 419, I think we've seen that it's a single-storey Galloway cottage. That's very in keeping. 420, I know the applicant would agree to proposed planting, and 421, I know the applicant would agree to the removal of the deceleration lane. So the only sort of counter that, for me, having witnessed this, the only good ground for arguing against it would be possibly if one accepted the practice note here, where this point about this should specifically discount the rented land. I think in a lot of cases that would be a reasonable grounds for refusal, but in this case the applicant has a track record of holding on to this land, and it would be such a shame if we said, well, okay, you've got to be somebody rich enough to buy a big farm or be lucky enough to inherit a farm, otherwise you're not a suitable applicant for H3. So this young couple have really done a lot in the last 10, well, particularly the applicant, have done a lot to build up this business without any subsidy, and I think these are the type of people that we need to support in our area. I think, and so it may be that we see this as an exception, but I don't know if it is an exception, because it's only in the planning development management practice note that it's mentioned about the ownership of land. So if it is an exception, then I think we should grant this exception, but it could also, if you don't recognise that as being part of the planning procedure, then the applicant fits the policy really well, and it's exactly the type of person we need to support. Thank you.
You'd like to respond, Steve?
Chair, I'm not going to respond to all of that, because I think there's a lot of information and detail in the case officer's report. But just to be absolutely clear here, the recommendation for refusal is not based purely on the development management practice note or guidance note. It's based on the policy position as set out in the local development plan. So the recommendation for refusal is that the proposal is contrary to the policy as stated in the local development plan, policy H3, because it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that a new dwelling house is essential at this location for the operational needs of the small agricultural business. So that is the reason for refusal, just so that we're clear, Chair.
Dougie?
Thank you, Chair. I have some sympathy for the applicant in seeking to have a base, but I think what Councillor James is effectively asking us to do is disregard LDPH3 policy, and I think we have to be very careful about that, going away from the policy as it is stated. And the concern that I've got is sustainability of the business and the requirement to disregard the fields that have been rented. Other members might know better than me, but how long will the applicant have secured this land for? Could he lose it tomorrow, next month, next year? And I can see the justification for having a caveat built in terms of the rented land, because it does raise concerns about sustainability. But if the member wants to come back and perhaps enlighten me in terms of how how certain is the applicant that he can hold on to this additional land elsewhere in the Stewartry?
Right. I'll let you back in a minute. I'll like to listen to Councillor Blake.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I too have a lot of sympathy in this case. I think it's a bit harsh that we have to exclude the land that's under rent. The report quite clearly states that the land that's under his control, that there are specific need there in that it's pedigree sheep, there'll be lambing, calving, and a lot of activity that would need to be supervised, and certainly supervised round the clock. And I think in this case, if it is against policy, I think we should give this serious consideration for an exception to that policy. I know that we cannot put a Section 75 order on this, but I seem to remember in a fairly recent case a few months ago, there was some condition that we could put it was for a period of time, I believe, but I can't really remember the detail of it. I don't know if Steve would be able to help. And that, I think it was for a period of 10 years that it was tied to the business. There was something that was still within the conditions that could, without putting a Section 75, which we obviously can't do.
I'm not familiar with that particular case. Sorry, Chair, unable to advise on that.
You want to come back in here?
Yeah, it's just if he's not aware of the case, I believe it was somewhere in the Annan area, and it was a land that was about 18 acres, I believe, and under similar thing, I think it was also the plant hire came into it. It was these conditions, but the approval we gave, I'm sure we did approve that was on a temporary condition. And I seem to recall it was around 10 years, but if Steve's not aware of it. But I still think that this particular case should be, at the very least, an exception to policy on the grounds that I gave.
Do you want to come back in?
Yes, please. And I mean, I too had the concerns exactly the same as raised by Councillor Campbell there. But after having delved into it, I see that over the last 10 years, the applicant has been able to acquire more land year on year. His problem here specifically was because this was only raised at the very last moment, he couldn't officially react to it, but he was able to obtain letters of intent from the owners of the land where he has tenants at the moment, or he has a tenant at the moment, and I think the NFU could have helped him with the background, stating that it's not normal at the moment to be able to obtain long-term tenancies, but that there's every prospect that he will actually be able to grow his land. I think he's very ambitious to buy land, but that would only be possible really if he's seen as a credit-worthy risk, and he can only really establish that by having this infrastructure point where he owns the infrastructure. So I think he has done everything that could be required of someone to demonstrate that he's someone who will have land going forward. So in principle, if we wouldn't give permission to him on this basis, that would effectively mean that anyone who didn't have a large private landholding was knocked out here. So I think given that he's done 10 years hard work and proved that to us, that's ground for an exception. But I do accept that the norm should be that we need to have the proof that the land is there for the next generation or so. But in this case, he's proved that to us as well as anyone can.
Patsy.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very interesting debate, this one, and quite testing in a way. I've never been a great one to support unnecessary housing in the countryside. I always think there has to be a justification. With this application, I can absolutely see what the applicant is trying to do and the restraints and constraints that he's under in order to try and achieve a viable business within agriculture. And I think he's trying to do his best here. He's got, he's going to build a shed which will allow him to lambish pedigree sheep which is very important, and you need to be there to do that. I absolutely understand that. Within the house, which is, I think there is to be an office, so that will establish a business premises whereby he can manage the rest of his agricultural businesses, albeit not absolutely coterminous with this land. There is absolutely nothing wrong with farming rented land. There's I mean, there would be so many people. I could do it myself. I rent quite a lot of land. You need it to supplement land that you already have in order to have a viable business. It is just should not be discounted as part of this business. It absolutely shouldn't be. And we have been told, if you take into consideration the rented land, the business at present is both viable and sustainable. And I think that's a really important thing. And I would just ask members to perhaps consider the Council's priorities of building the local economy. And I quote, we should support our small and medium-sized businesses to be established and grow. I'd have to say there's few people find it easy to get into farming these days. Mr. Kerr is trying his best. He's got a bit of a proven record. And as a council, I just think we should be supporting a young entrant into agriculture. So I would agree with both Councillor Blake and Councillor James here that perhaps this should be an exception to policy, and I would propose that we approve it on that basis.
Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I don't think anybody is disagreeing with the business plan and you know the obvious business-like manner in which the applicant is moving forward in his actual business. I think the issue that we have at the moment is potentially we're making policy on the hoof for H3, and I don't like that particular way of doing things. There is an essential need criteria when we look at policy H3, and I can remember one similar in my ward not that long back, which was not given forward, and others that we have not given permission to because of this problem of housing in the countryside. The problem I have with that, of course, if we make an exception to this particular one, and then the other two or three will come back and say, well, wait a minute, here we go again. So we make a policy, we go through a policy, we go through a process of making policies, and we do want people, small and medium enterprises, to, you know, make sure that they enhance their position in Dumfries and Galloway. The issue here, of course, is that with the Labour report and that sort of thing, it's on the 4 odd hectares of land that's actually in that position. That in itself, you know, is a concern because of previous decisions that were made as a planning authority. In that vein, Chair, I mean, I would love to see the business go forward and improve and get to a stage where they do have that determination of being proved that they have a great business plan and moving on. But we have to decide on planning policy here about houses in the countryside. That being taken into consideration, I think we have to go with the recommendation because it hasn't been proven. There's an essential need for this particular house, and I would so move.
Ivor?
Chair, I think that there has been a need at this location. We have a small unit which actively has animal husbandry on the site of lambing, calving, etc. The one referred to previously in Councillor Dryborough's ward had a farmhouse on site and we're looking for a second house. This is looking for one house to be established on the site. It's difficult to justify a house in any situation if you look at it that way. If I had 1,000 acres, why that specific site on that specific 1,000 acres? There has been a reason given, which was that this is where the activity for the animal husbandry will take place. Therefore, I think we have a reason for doing it. It also states within our policies we are here to help establish and grow our businesses. Now, I know they're council priorities rather than possibly planning ones, but I think we have to take that into consideration as well. or maybe we just write a council plan for the sake of it, just to keep folk happy and stick it on the shelf for 5 years. And I don't think that's what it should be. And I also think that if you look across the region, every farmer who's been able to start up a business and then move on has taken rented ground in to allow them to eventually buy some ground. So I think it's the way that all farmers expand, and I think that's the way that we should look at this, that this is a tried and tested model of getting into farming in Dumfries and Galloway, and we should approve this application.
I don't think changing the council plan or changing planning policies merits. Everything should be taken on its own merits. Every application, we shouldn't just sort of change one to suit the other. Andrew.
Chair, based on what's been said here, I'm happy to support Councillor Gilroy's motion.
Okay, we've got a motion on the table.
To move things on, I'll support Archie Driver's motion.
So we've got a motion on the table from Patsy, seconded by Andrew. We've got an amendment from Archie, supported by John.
Chair, can you just clarify the motion? What reasons?
Yeah, could you clarify your motion, Patsy, and what reasons why we deviate from H3?
I think it has been satisfactorily demonstrated that a new dwelling house is essential at this location for the operational needs of a small agricultural business, and the proposal, although is contrary to policy, should be made an exceptional to local development plan policy H3 on this basis. And it also supports the council's priorities.
Well, I think that's the key thing is for you to articulate why it would be an exception to policy in the motion.
Sorry, I didn't pick up whether it was an exception to policy because it's only the development management practice note where that ownership requirement is actually mentioned. It's not in the supplementary guidance or in the local development plan. So I'm not clear that there is an exception to policy here, and I think the applicant's the fact that he's taken his business so far beyond what normally you can do because he's worked so hard, he's almost fallen into a trap where it could be argued that it's not essential because he's got a running business, but that's only because he's working harder than you can do. And I think if this application is unsuccessful, it will be proved that it was essential because that business will stop and it will be lost. So I think.
Sorry, Chair, you've asked me.
I
mean, it's in the last part of my reasons was that if you go to the council's priorities, this is an exception to policy because within the council's priorities, we are there to support small and medium-sized businesses to be established and grow, and there has been a huge amount of information in here to show that this is a business that is trying to grow and we should be supporting it.
That's a council policy. Mm-hmm. We're looking at planning policies here, which is different.
And so therefore it is an exception to H3.
Well, that's why we've got a vote. So. We'll go to the vote. Nick, can you just read out the motion and the amendment, please?
Thanks, Chair. So the motion proposed by Councillor Gilroy and seconded by Councillor Giusti is to approve the application as it's demonstrated an operational need for a house in this location, and that we make an exception to policy as the proposal supports, the proposal would support the council priority in terms of economic development in supporting new businesses.
Can I ask if that is competent?
Yes, it's competent.
Excuse me, but it refers to the council plan and not to the local development plan. And surely to be competent in terms of planning, it has to have a planning reason rather than a council plan reason, but actually refers to the council, to the local development plan or...
Yeah, that's my understanding. I'll get Steve to come in and clarify things.
Can I just clarify the legal position with regard to determining planning applications? And this is printed on the inside of the cover of your agendas. So it's point 1, Section 25 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act requires that planning decisions be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So what you're discussing here is that's what it says in the development plan, but in terms of the motion, you wish to give greater weight to other considerations, other material considerations. So the key thing is, are those other considerations material to planning? Now, certainly business support and economic development is a material planning consideration. So I would say that that would be acceptable. The reference to the council plan I don't think is necessary because you're describing those material considerations in general terms.
Is everybody clear on that? Yeah. Okay, right, Nick.
And the amendment proposed by Councillor Dryborough and seconded by Councillor Martin, that the application be refused given on the grounds that it's contrary to policy and an overwhelming need for a property in this location hasn't been demonstrated. Yeah. Councillor John Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Blake. Councillor Doogie Campbell.
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough.
Amendment.
Councillor Gilroy. Councillor Giusti.
Motion.
Councillor Hagman isn't present. Councillor Hislop. Councillor James.
Motion.
Councillor Lever.
Amendment.
Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor Murray.
Amendment.
Councillor Young.
Motion.
Voting is as follows. 8 members voting in favour of the motion and 5 in favour of the amendment. Therefore, the motion is carried and the application is approved.
Chair, that being the case, can I ask the delegation to attach appropriate standard planning conditions that we would normally attach in this instance?
Yeah. Right. If there's no other business, I would like to say that lunch will be in room 2, if anybody's hungry. I certainly am. So thank you very much.